We are continuing our series on vertebrates. Our last segment, we talked about the rise of the amniotic egg, a covering around the egg that allowed creatures to lay eggs on land, which is a really, really big deal. Let's continue now talking about the actual reptiles that we have on planet Earth. So these sometimes get confused with our amphibians, but reptiles, what makes them them? You have scales, you have internal fertilization, they are still cold-blooded, and they also have quite a variety to them. So crocodiles, alligators, caimans, turtles, tuataras, snakes, and lizards are all part of the reptiles. If we look at the evolutionary history of these reptiles, here is the native reptile. And so we see that reptiles gave rise to some of the things that we have today, but then also gave rise to some of our dinosaurs that unfortunately we don't have today. And so there's kind of a lot of different divisions of reptiles. And because of that amniotic egg, it really allowed them to flourish on land for a long time. And we know that dinosaurs were the dominant life form for a really long time. That is, of course, until the KT asteroid, the Cretaceous Tertiary asteroid, which was thought to basically hit Earth, literally buried some dinosaurs alive, and that's why we have so many fossils of them, but also sent a huge bunch of ash and dust into the air and somewhat heated up our atmosphere. And creatures like mammals and fish and some reptiles that were able to stay in ground or underwater were able to survive, but a lot of dinosaurs at that time were terrestrial and unfortunately perished because of that KT asteroid. So with reptiles, again, some of the keys are that you do have, complete digestion, you have bilateral symmetry, you have definitely some advanced organs that are taking place. You still have some dependency on water for a lot of them, but because of that amniotic egg, not as much as what we see with the amphibians, or certainly not with the fish. And so things like tortoises, which are different than turtles, by the way, they are primarily unaquatic. They don't really spend any time with water, not much of it. Where turtles, they are going to be a little bit more aquatic than their counterparts, the tortoises. Lizards and snakes, same thing. A lot of them can live without water for extended periods of time. Obviously, we know that every creature needs to have living things. But the lizards and snakes are the biggest division of reptiles. Most of them are insect eaters, but also a lot of them are carnivorous. And the snakes especially, they have movable jaws, so specialized structures that allow them to do so. Snakes can be poisonous and non-poisonous. The way that you tell, here's a fun fact for you today, is that poisonous snakes will have a diamond-shaped eye, where non-poisonous snakes are going to have a circular eye. So there's a fun fact for you if you ever get in trouble there. So our lizards, again, very, very numerous. We don't have a lot of them in Minnesota in the upper Midwest because obviously we're cold and they're cold-blooded creatures. They survive best in warm temps, in humid temps, and when you have warm and humid, you have a lot of insects. When you have a lot of insects, you have a lot of reptiles. And so there's been a lot of different kinds of reptiles that have come and gone. And, we have a few different kinds of reptiles here in the upper Midwest, but not nearly as where, you have the hot climate and where you have a lot of different kinds of insects. So here's the example of the amniotic egg. Remember, in reptiles, it's not an actual hard shell like a chicken egg, but it is somewhat leathery. And again, the reason why that is so big is because it allowed that embryo to feed on the nutrient sac. That's the yolk. So another fun fact for you, if you have an egg, what actually becomes the creature? Is it the yolk or is it the white part? The answer is the white part. The yolk is the nutrient packet. And so here you're actually seeing kind of a example of this embryo is taking the nutrients from that yolk and is going to develop until eventually it hatches. So kind of unique. So reptiles, scaled. Our next division, birds. If you've ever looked at a bird leg before, they have scales. What the heck's with the feathers? The feathers were thought to derive from the scales. They're somewhat specialized. And what's kind of cool is that if you've ever seen Jurassic Park and you've seen the velociraptors, which they kind of highlight on the later movies, is that they actually do have feathers. And so creatures like what you see here is that those reptiles started to gain feathers. They feel that it was originally for a sexual selection type purpose, but then they understood that it gave them an advantage with flight. And so when we look at a feather and we look at a scale, they're made out of the same stuff. It's a protein called keratin. We have some of it in our fingernails, And so that keratin started to bend and grow in such a way that gave them rise to feathers. And obviously, as we look at feathers, if you look at them microscopically, they are really, really intricate in how they're kind of combined to be light, but also not allow wind or air to escape. And that allowed birds basically to flourish and be one of the more dominant life forms that we have on Earth today. So, what makes birds able to fly? Many things. One is a really, really good respiratory system. Birds don't tucker out easily. If you've ever heard the phrase, you eat like a bird, birds eat a lot. The reason why is because they use a lot of energy or they expend a lot of energy to fly. The other main reason why they're able to fly is because their bones are super porous. So if you've ever picked up a dead bird, except for like a turkey or even a chicken, they're super, super light. Some of our less flighted birds, like the turkey and the chicken, they're a little bit more dense. And so when you look at this image, this is what we would typically see with like a flighted bird, where a chicken or a turkey would have much more dense bones, and that's why they can only fly for short periods of time and certainly not sustain. So not only that, but they also have very, very good muscles that allow them to flap their wings and stay in flight. They also use mechanisms like, different wind speeds to fly, and so they don't always have to flap their wings. They can fly by using some of the air and wind that's around them. So, what makes a bird a bird? They have feathers. All of them have feathers. Usually, most of them are capable of flight. 2 wings, 2 legs. They have scaled feet, and again, that's why they're thought to be remnants of the reptiles. And so that's what makes a bird a bird. Okay, last one, the one that we know best, mammals. Main things that make mammals mammals. Mammary glands. They have milk. The female is able to produce milk. That's a big, big significant thing to help nurture their offspring. They are covered with hair or fur, except for what's called the naked mole rat. If you want something to Google, go ahead and look that up. They are definitely not the cutest things. Most of our mammals also give live birth. Not all of them, as we'll learn about momentarily, but most of them. And so mammals have been around for a while, but they really, really flourished after those dinosaurs had gone extinct. And the reason for that is they were able to bury themselves, hide, withstand some of those temperatures, and still able to survive. So, before dinosaurs, there weren't a lot of them, a lot of mammals. But afterwards, we see what's called this adaptive radiation, this big explosion of different kinds of life. And that's what you're seeing here with radiated after dinosaur extinction. Here's an artist's rendition of what was thought to be around. So here you kind of see like a possum-like creature, squirrel-like creature, maybe a weasel-like creature, here maybe a cat-like creature. And then once those predators were gone, now think about all of the squirrel-like things we have. Think about all the weasel-like things we have. And so now they are, along with birds, our most dominant terrestrial life form. And then obviously you got to have some other stuff like cat-like creatures as mentioned. Here you have a creature, no, this isn't a giraffe-like creature, but this might have been the rise of some of our like hippos and elephants and rhinos and that sort of thing that we have today. So 3 different groupings of mammals. These are important to know for upcoming assessments. Monotremes, those are egg-laying mammals. There's only 2. Platypus, spiny anteater. Marsupials, those are pouched mammals. The only one in North America that we have is the possum. Otherwise, in Australia, mate, we have a whole bunch, like the koala and the kangaroo, of course, among others. And then you have the eutherians, and those are the placental mammals. That's what the majority of mammals are. So when we look at the different monotremes, I think I said 2 species. I should have said 2 groups. The platypus and then the anteater. So they lay eggs. Here's the spiny anteater. Here's the other type of anteater. And I'm sorry I don't have a picture of a platypus, but duck-billed platypus if you want to Google that. So most of our marsupials, they live in Australia. There's 260 different kinds that are in Australia or like New Guinea or New Zealand, but a lot of them are just in that area. Like I said, we only have one, that being the possum. And so we then get into our placental mammals. This is the most diverse. So the young is obviously conceived inside the uterus, where then it becomes an embryo, and then it becomes what we call like a baby. and then it's able to feed from that placenta. Placenta is like the equivalent of a yolk in an egg, and the umbilical cord is what allows them to continue to have those nutrients. So we'll look at a picture of us as humans inside of our mother momentarily. But placental mammals develop a lot better and quicker than the marsupials because they have that direct nutrient availability. Where the marsupials, so like a kangaroo, it's kind of fun, but they're basically born, they're about like the size of your pinky, if not smaller. A kangaroo is born about the size of your pinky. Then they go to their mom's pouch, and that's where her nipples are, and that's where her mammary glands are, and there they will nurse. And then after that, they become, so big, and then they're able to go from the pouch. But with the embryotic creatures, they get that direct nutrient inside the mom. So there's kind of that protection and that ability to live. So speaking of humans, there we are. So inside of our mom, so this is inside the uterus, that's where the child will be conceived, the embryo, and then it becomes a baby. And then the placenta becomes the nutrient pack. And here we see the umbilical cord is attached to that nutrient pack. And then obviously after birth, then we have the mammary glands, which are going to continue the nutrition that we would need for mammals. So mammals, there's a lot of them. Bats, whales, we don't think of those, dolphins, as mammals, but indeed they are. So things like manatees, camels, seals, bats. There's some weird ones, flying squirrel that you saw on the previous slide, and then a typical like red fox. So those are what we call our mammals. All covered with hair or fur except for that naked mole rat. They have the mammary glands. Majority have live birth, but then we also have a few exceptions to that rule, just like what we have in the rest of biology. The rest of chapter 26 does go over some of our like primate stuff and human evolution. The CLEP biology and advanced biology doesn't do much with that. You could spend a whole semester learning about this stuff, and it really is fascinating kind of where we came from. So if you have time or get bored, certainly take a look at that and how we were thought to rise with things like tool users and that sort of stuff, and some of our different lineages, so like Homo erectus and Neanderthalis, those types of things. So it is really fascinating if you ever want to take a look at that in chapter 26. But we'll call that our discovery of vertebrates complete. See ya!